Lauren stood at the kitchen sink, her hands submerged in warm, soapy water, scrubbing remnants of last night's dinner from a ceramic plate. She watched the water swirl down the drain, disappearing as effortlessly as the life she thought she knew. The text message from an unknown number flashed before her eyes. "Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again." She had read it 3 times, each word sinking deeper, clawing at her chest. The message had come through on Ethan's phone as he showered, his laughter echoing off the bathroom tiles. For a moment, she stood frozen, the device trembling in her hands, a cruel shard of glass in her palm. Her throat constricted, her lungs refused to fill, and the ground beneath her wobbled. The sound of the shower shutting off jolted her back to reality. She had dropped the phone on the bed and fled, the echo of his carefree whistle haunting her all night. Now, as she watched the water spiral down the drain, she wondered how long it would take for her life to be flushed away just as easily. The front door creaked open. She stiffened, the plate slipping in her soapy grip. Ethan's footsteps shuffled closer, his voice warm, familiar, a stranger's. "Morning, babe. Did you sleep in here again?" She forced herself to breathe. "Couldn't sleep. Too much. On my mind." Ethan's arms wrapped around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "You've been distant lately. Is everything okay?" His voice was laced with genuine concern, yet the memory of the text twisted it into a mockery. She swallowed. The words lodged in her throat. "Is everything okay?" Her husband had received a text from another woman. A woman who knew his touch, his laughter, his affection. How was she supposed to answer that? "I'm fine," she lied, her voice steady, detached. She could feel his eyes on her, searching, his fingers lingering before he pulled away. "I miss you, Lauren. Whatever it is, we'll figure it out," he said, his sincerity cutting like glass. She didn't turn around. "I know." That evening, Lauren sat at the dining table, her laptop open, its screen illuminating her face. She had combed through their phone records, pieced together the puzzle of unfamiliar numbers, late-night calls, and gaps she had never noticed before. It all pointed to a name she did not recognize. Hannah Caldwell. The name felt sour in her mouth, bitter on her tongue. A woman she didn't know, whose laughter was probably echoing in her husband's ears, whose body he was probably craving when he touched her. She closed her laptop, her hands shaking. Her reflection in the dark screen stared back, a woman on the edge of a precipice. How had she missed this? How had she become so complacent? "Lauren." Ethan's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. He stood in the doorway, concern painting his features. "You've barely touched your dinner. Are you sure you're okay?" She looked up, meeting his eyes, searching for a flicker of guilt, a trace of deception. All she saw was worry, affection, love. It shattered her. How could he look at her like that, knowing what he'd done? "I'm fine. Just tired," she murmured, pushing her chair back. "I think I'll head to bed early." Ethan reached for her hand, his touch warm, steady. "Hey, whatever's bothering you, I'm here, okay? I love you." The words twisted, like a knife in her chest. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to tear him apart with questions. But she only nodded, her voice fragile. "I love you too." As she walked away, she wondered which of them was the bigger liar. The next day, Lauren sat in her car outside a quaint cafe, her hands clenched around the steering wheel. Through the glass window, she saw her, a young brunette, laughing as she typed on her phone. Hannah Caldwell. Lauren's chest tightened. She watched as the woman sipped her coffee, her fingers tapping at the screen, sending words to the man who shared Lauren's bed, who whispered sweet nothings in her ear. She felt her stomach twist. It was real. This woman was real. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Just landed. Can't wait to see you tonight. Miss you. Lauren stared at the message, bile rising in her throat. He was in Chicago, supposedly on a business trip, yet the hours didn't add up. He had lied again. She looked back at the woman in the cafe, her laughter lighting up the room. Lauren wanted to confront her, to tear her world apart, just as she had done to hers. But then she remembered Ethan's smile, his gentle touch, his whispered promises. Was this woman a villain, or just another victim of Ethan's deception? The thought stopped her cold. She looked at Hannah, truly looked at her. A woman, oblivious, carefree, believing herself cherished, just like Lauren once did. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes. She had come here ready for a fight, but now she only felt the weight of betrayal. The car door opened before she realized it. She walked towards the cafe, her steps heavy, her heart thundering. Ethan stood in the dimly lit living room, his head buried in his hands, the silence pressing down on him like a weight he could barely carry. He heard the faint click of the bedroom door locking, a barrier more impenetrable than stone. He wanted to bang on the door, to plead, to explain himself until his voice was raw. But he didn't deserve that. He had lied, cheated, shattered the woman who trusted him most. No words could undo that. His phone buzzed. He flinched, dread crawling up his spine. A message from Hannah. "Hey, did you make it back home okay? I miss you." His stomach turned. He stared at the words, his fingers trembling. How had he let it get this far? He typed out a response, his jaw clenched tight. "It's over. Don't contact me again." He hesitated, then hit send. The reply came almost immediately. "Ethan, what's going on? I thought you cared about me." His chest tightened. He had cared. In his selfishness, in his loneliness, he had let himself care. But it was all a lie. He had used Hannah to escape his own fears, his own weaknesses. He blocked her number, tossing his phone onto the couch as if it were on fire. But the shame didn't leave him. It suffocated him, pressing in from every side. Lauren sat on the edge of the bed, her back against the headboard, knees pulled to her chest. She stared at the closet door, the familiar clothes inside mocking her with their normalcy. The world felt so unchanged, so indifferent, while everything she had ever believed crumbled beneath her. Her chest ached, a hollow, gnawing pain that wouldn't go away. She thought about the life they had built, their first tiny apartment, the late-night talks, the promises whispered in the dark. How many of those promises had he broken? How many were lies? A knock at the door startled her. "Lauren, please. Can we talk?" She squeezed her eyes shut, a tear slipping down her cheek. His voice was so close, so familiar. It hurt to even listen to him. "I can't. Not right now." Silence. She thought he'd left, but then his voice came, softer, cracking, at the edges. "I'm so sorry. I don't know how to fix this. But I need you to know that I'm sorry, that I love you. I never stopped." She bit her lip to stifle a sob. How could he still say that? After everything, was love supposed to hurt this much? She heard him walk away, his footsteps heavy, defeated. A part of her wanted to open the door, to throw herself into his arms, to believe in his apologies. But she couldn't. Not yet. Maybe not ever. 2 days passed in a tense, fragile truce. They moved around each other in the house like shadows, their words sparse, their eyes never meeting for more than a heartbeat. Ethan slept on the couch. He didn't try to sneak back into the bedroom, didn't push her for forgiveness. He simply existed, his shoulders hunched, his movements slow, cautious. Lauren watched him from the doorway one night, his body curled up under a thin blanket, his breathing heavy, uneven. She remembered the way he used to pull her close in his sleep, his arm always finding her waist. Now he reached for nothing, his hands empty. Her heart twisted, but she forced herself to turn away, her feet carrying her back to the cold, lonely bed. On the third day, she finally broke the silence. "We need to talk." Ethan looked up from his untouched plate, his eyes hollow, rimmed with exhaustion. "Okay." His voice was barely above a whisper. They sat at the dining table, a chasm between them. She folded her hands, squeezing them until her knuckles turned white. "How long?" He didn't pretend to misunderstand. 4 months. Lauren's breath caught. She looked down, her vision blurring. 4 months. 4 months of lies, of deception, of another woman sharing what was supposed to be hers. "Did you love her?" Her voice cracked, the words jagged, raw. His face crumbled. "No, I thought I did, but it was never real. I was just lost." Her fingers trembled. "Lost?" She scoffed, her pain boiling over. "You destroyed us because you were lost?" He flinched, his face twisted with regret. "I was scared, Lauren, scared of getting older, of becoming invisible. You were always so perfect. I felt like I was fading, like I didn't matter." She stared at him, anger and heartbreak swirling together. "So you cheated on me? You betrayed me because you felt insecure?" "I was weak," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I was selfish, and I hate myself for it. If I could take it all back, if I could change it, I would." She looked away, tears burning her eyes. "But you can't." Her voice was soft, broken. "You can't undo this. You can't fix what you shattered." He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I can't lose you, Lauren. I can't lose us." Lauren stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "You already did." Her voice wavered, but her gaze was steady. "You lost me the moment you chose her." She walked away, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between them grew heavier, more suffocating. They moved through the house like strangers, sharing the same space, but living in different worlds. Ethan tried to bridge the distance, leaving notes on the kitchen. Counter, small apologies, reminders of better days. But they went untouched, disappearing into the trash without a word. Lauren was a ghost, her eyes hollow, her voice flat. She went through the motions, work, chores, family obligations. But she was somewhere far away, lost in the pain that refused to fade. She couldn't bring herself to leave. Not yet. The thought of starting over, of dismantling the life they had built, was too overwhelming. But she also couldn't find a way back to him. His betrayal had carved a chasm between them, one she didn't know how to cross. One evening, she stood at the kitchen sink washing dishes as the sun dipped below the horizon. She heard his footsteps behind her, hesitant, shuffling. "Lauren." His voice was low, tentative. "I made an appointment with a therapist. For me. I need help. I need to figure out why I did this, why I ruined everything." Her hands froze under the stream of water, her heart tightening. She wanted to feel relief, hope, something, but all she felt was exhaustion. "Okay," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he continued, his words careful, fragile. "I don't even expect you to give us another chance, but I need to be better. For me. And if there's any hope of us, I need to try." She nodded, still facing the sink, her shoulders stiff. "I hope you find what you're looking for." He lingered a moment, waiting for more, for a sign that she still cared. But when none came, he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading. Down the hall, Lauren's grip tightened on the plate, her knuckles turning white. She wanted to scream, to throw the plate against the wall, to shatter it the way her heart had been shattered. But she just stood there, the water running cold, her body rigid, unyielding. A week later, Ethan came home to find Lauren sitting at the dining table, a stack of papers in front of her. His stomach dropped, dread washing over him. She looked up, her face pale, her eyes swollen. "I talked to a lawyer," the world tilted beneath his feet. You want a divorce?" Her gaze flickered, a brief crack in her armor. "I don't know, I needed to know what my options were." Ethan sank into a chair, his hands trembling. "Lauren, please. I know I've hurt you, I know I broke your trust. But don't we deserve a chance to fix this? To at least try?" She looked down at the papers, her fingers brushing the edges. "I don't know how to trust you again. I don't know if I can." "I'll do anything," he said, his voice cracking. "Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes. Just don't give up on us. Not yet." Lauren's eyes shimmered, her pain palpable. "Do you even understand what you did to me? Every time I close my eyes, I see you with her. I see the lies, the betrayal, and it kills me. I don't know how to get past that." His shoulders sagged, his face contorting with guilt. "I was a coward. I ran to her because I was too afraid to face my own fears. I thought I was losing you, that we were growing apart, and I was too weak to admit it. I betrayed you, and I betrayed myself." She looked at him then, truly looked at him. And for the first time, she saw the broken man beneath the facade. She saw his shame, his regret, his self-loathing. And it hurt, because she had loved him once, because a part of her still did. But love wasn't enough, not anymore. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know if I want to." Ethan's face fell, his hope crumbling. "I understand." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "But I'm not giving up. Even if you walk away, I won't stop trying to be the man you deserve. Even if you never see it, I won't stop." Lauren's chest tightened, her vision blurring. She wanted to believe him, to believe in redemption, in second chances. But the pain was still too raw, too deep. She stood up, gathering the papers. "I need space. Time to think." He nodded, his shoulders slumping. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here, waiting." She turned away, walking down the hall, her heart heavy, conflicted. She didn't know what she wanted, what the future held. She only knew that nothing would ever be the same. That night, Lauren lay awake, her thoughts spiraling. She remembered their wedding day, his smile so bright, so full of promise. She remembered the late nights, the laughter, the dreams they had shared. She remembered the first time he told her he loved her, the way her heart had soared. And then, she remembered his betrayal, the lies, the stolen moments with another woman. She remembered the devastation, the suffocating agony of realizing she had been a fool. Could she ever forgive him? Could she live with the knowledge of his infidelity? Days passed in a fragile ceasefire. They spoke only when necessary, their words clipped, devoid of warmth. Yet they coexisted, bound by a shared history and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Lauren kept herself busy, throwing herself into work, volunteering, anything to avoid the hollow ache that had taken up residence in her chest. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the memories, the way Ethan's touch had once made her feel safe, cherished. Now, the thought of his hands on her skin made her flinch. Ethan, on the other hand, buried himself in self-improvement. He kept his promise and went to therapy, confronting the demons he had spent years avoiding. He began to understand his fears of inadequacy, his insecurities that had driven him to seek validation elsewhere. It was a painful reckoning. But he faced it, hoping that one day Lauren might see the man he was trying to become. He also took to writing her letters. Every night after she went to bed, he would sit at the kitchen table and pour his heart on too. The page, his regrets, his memories, his love. But he never gave them to her. They sat in a drawer, hidden away, his confessions written in ink, but sealed in silence. One evening, Lauren sat on the couch, staring blankly at the television. She wasn't watching, wasn't listening. Her mind was miles away, trapped in a loop of doubt and pain. She jumped when she heard Ethan's voice behind her. "Lauren, I was wondering if you'd be open to going to couples therapy? With me." Her jaw tightened, a defensive wall rising instantly. "I don't know. He—" looked down, his fingers twisting nervously. "I know I don't deserve it, but I think if we could just talk, really talk, maybe we could find a way forward, even if it's not together." His vulnerability caught her off guard. She was so used to seeing him as the villain, the man who had destroyed their life. But here he was, raw and exposed, asking for a chance to make things right. The anger flared, hot and fierce. "You want to talk? Now? After lying to me for months? After making me feel like I was losing my mind?" His face fell, shame washing over him. "I know. I was a coward. I was selfish. But I don't want to hide anymore. I want to be honest, no matter how much it hurts." She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deceit. But all she saw was pain, regret, and something else. Something that looked a lot like hope. Against her better judgment, she felt herself wavering. She didn't trust him, didn't know if she ever could. But maybe she owed it to herself to at least try. Not for him. For her. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice guarded. He nodded, relief flooding his features. "That's all I'm asking. Thank you." She looked away, her chest tight. "Don't thank me yet. I'm not promising anything." "I know," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "But it's more than I deserve." He turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the flickering light of the TV and the echo of his words. The next morning, Lauren found herself standing in front of their bedroom closet, staring at Ethan's clothes. Shirts she had once ironed, jackets she had straightened before date nights, ties she had picked out for special occasions. Now they felt like relics of a life that no longer existed. Without thinking, she reached up and pulled one of his shirts from the hanger, burying her face in the fabric. His scent was still there, faint but unmistakable, and a sob escaped before she could stop it. She sank to the floor, clutching the shirt, the weight of her grief pressing down, suffocating. She had loved him with everything she had. And he had shattered that love, turned it into something tainted, broken. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable, years of memories flooding back, good and bad, beautiful and ugly, all tangled together. She hated him for what he had done, for the pain he had caused. But she also hated herself for still loving him, for missing him even as he stood right there, a stranger wearing her husband's face. When the tears finally stopped, she felt empty, hollow. But beneath the sorrow, something else had taken root. A faint ember of determination. She couldn't keep living like this, trapped between anger and longing. She had to confront the truth, whatever it was, no matter how much it hurt. Maybe therapy was the answer. Maybe not. But she wouldn't know unless she tried. Wiping her face, she stood up, smoothing the shirt before hanging it back in the closet. Her hands lingered on the fabric for a moment before she turned away, closing the door with a finality that felt like a step forward. 2 weeks later, they sat together in a therapist's office, an uncomfortable silence hanging between them. Lauren's hands were clenched in her lap, her shoulders tense. Ethan sat rigid, his eyes fixed on the floor. The therapist, an older woman with kind eyes, looked at them both. "Why are you here today?" The sessions were brutal. Every week, Lauren found herself confronting truths she had buried, emotions she had denied. Each revelation felt like peeling back a layer of herself, exposing raw wounds that hadn't begun to heal. Ethan didn't fare any better. Under the therapist's unflinching guidance, he was forced to face the consequences of his actions, to see the pain he had inflicted. There were days he could barely look Lauren in the eye, shame clawing at him, relentless and unforgiving. But they kept showing up, week after week, clinging to the hope that something, anything, could come from this pain, even if it was just understanding, even if it was just closure. It was a rainy Tuesday when Lauren found herself standing outside Ethan's office building. She hadn't planned on coming here. She had been downtown for a work meeting, and then, almost instinctively, she was there, staring up at the glass tower where he spent his days. She hesitated, torn between the urge to leave and the need to understand. Taking a deep breath, she walked inside, past the bustling lobby, up the elevator, and down the hall to his office. She froze just outside the doorway, her heart pounding, and then she saw her, Carmen. The woman was standing next to Ethan, leaning over his desk, pointing at something on his computer screen. She was laughing, her hand lightly touching his shoulder, her body language open, familiar. Lauren's blood ran cold. She felt nauseous, her vision blurring as a surge of anger and betrayal surged through her. Had it been a lie? All of it? Were they still seeing each other? Before she could think, she was walking forward, her voice cold and sharp. "Am I interrupting something?" Both Ethan and Carmen jumped, their faces mirroring shock and guilt. Carmen straightened immediately, her eyes wide. "Oh, Lauren, I didn't realize." Lauren's gaze was icy, locked on Ethan. "Didn't realize what? That the wife you helped betray might show up?" Ethan's face turned pale, his mouth opening and closing, struggling to find words. "Lauren, it's not what it looks like." Carmen looked horrified, her face flushing. "I should go." She gathered her things quickly, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry, Ethan. I didn't mean to. I didn't know she'd—" She fled before finishing, leaving them alone in the office. Lauren stood rigid, her arms crossed, her jaw tight. "You promised me. You promised you'd cut all contact with her." "I did," Ethan insisted, his voice pleading. "She transferred to another department months ago. She just came by today to discuss a work project. That's all it was, I swear." Her eyes narrowed, disbelief etched across her face. "You expect me to believe that? After everything?" He looked devastated, his shoulders slumping. "I know I have no right to ask you to trust me, but that's the truth. Nothing is going on between us." Not anymore. The pain was sharp, twisting inside her. She wanted to believe him, to think he was being honest, but she had believed him before, and it had cost her everything. "How am I supposed to believe you?" she asked, her voice breaking. "After all the lies?" His face contorted with guilt. I don't know how to fix this. But I want to. I want to fix us, Lauren. I don't want to lose you." She looked away, tears burning her eyes. "You already did." She turned and walked out, her heart shattering all over again. That night, Lauren sat alone on their bed, Carmen's, face flashing in her mind, the laughter, the touch, the ease with which she had stood by Ethan's side. It haunted her. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. "I'm sorry. I understand if you don't believe me, but I promise you, nothing is going on. I'm committed to us, to trying to rebuild what I broke. I'll do whatever it takes. Just, please don't give up on us." She stared at the words, her emotions tangled. She wanted to believe him, wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt, but she couldn't ignore the gnawing doubt that Carmen was still a part of his life, that the betrayal was ongoing, hidden behind more lies. The house felt suffocating. The walls were too close, the memories too painful. She grabbed her keys and left, driving aimlessly until she found herself at her sister's house. Kara opened the door, her eyes widening at the sight of Lauren's tear-stained face. Oh my God, what happened? Without a word, Lauren collapsed. Into her sister's arms, the sobs racking her body, the pain too much to bear. The following days were a blur. Lauren stayed with Kara, avoiding Ethan's calls, his texts, his pleas for her to come home. She needed space, needed time to think, to decide what she wanted. Finally, she agreed to meet him at the therapist's office, neutral ground. She walked in, her guard up, her heart heavy. Ethan was already there, looking exhausted, defeated. He looked up as she entered, his eyes full of hope and fear. "Thank you for coming." She sat down, her posture stiff. "This doesn't change anything. I just want answers." The days that followed were filled with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, suffocating quiet that settled into every corner of their house. Ethan stayed in the guest room, giving Lauren the space she needed, waiting for her decision. Lauren moved through the motions of her life, going to work, seeing Kara, attending therapy, but always with the same question weighing on her. Could she forgive him? Her heart was a battlefield, torn between the love she still felt and the deep betrayal that had shattered her. There were moments she thought she could move forward, that she could believe his promises of change. But then she'd remember the nights he came home late, the lies, the deception, and the image of Carmen standing next to him, so at ease, would flash before her eyes. Trust, once broken, was impossible to repair, or at least that's what she had always believed. One evening, as rain poured outside, Lauren found herself standing in front of their wedding photos. Their smiles were wide, their eyes full of hope and promise. She reached out, her fingers brushing over the glass. How had they gotten here? How had everything fallen apart? Ethan's voice broke the silence. "I miss us." She turned, startled to find him standing in the doorway, his face pale, his shoulders slumped. He looked older, weary. "I miss the way we used to be." "Before all of this," he continued, his voice heavy with regret, "I know I ruined it. I know I have no right to ask for another chance. But I miss you, Lauren. I miss us." Her chest tightened, the vulnerability in his words cutting through her. She wanted to shout, to lash out, to tell him he didn't get to miss something he destroyed. But she was too tired for anger. "What if we can't get back to that?" she asked, her voice hollow. "What if too much has happened?" He stepped, closer, his eyes pleading. "Then we build something new, something better, something honest." Her breath hitched, tears burning her eyes. "I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can trust you again." His shoulders sagged, pain flickering across his face. "I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm worth trusting. Even if you never believe, yet." They stood there in silence, the rain tapping against the windows, their words hanging in the air. A week later, Lauren met with Carmen. It was impulsive, something she didn't think through until she was sitting in the cafe watching the woman approach. Carmen looked nervous, her hands twisting together. She sat down, her eyes avoiding Lauren's. "I didn't expect you to reach out." Lauren's voice was cold. "I needed answers, and I needed them from you." Carmen's face flushed, shame evident. "I don't know what to say. I'm sorry. Doesn't even begin to cover it." "No, it doesn't." Lauren's gaze was piercing. "I want to know the truth. Did you know he was married from the start?" Carmen hesitated, her shoulders slumping. "Yes, I knew." The admission was a punch to the gut. "So you knew and you did it anyway? Why?" Tears welled up in Carmen's eyes. "I was stupid and selfish. I told myself it was just fun, just an escape. I never thought about you or the consequences. I never thought it would go as far as it did." "Did you love him?" The question slipped out before Lauren could stop herself. Carmen's eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. No, no, I didn't. It wasn't like that. It was never about love. It was about feeling wanted, about the thrill of it all. I never wanted to ruin your marriage, Lauren laughed bitterly. Well, congratulations. You did. Carmen flinched, her face pale. I really am sorry, Lauren. I know that doesn't mean much, but I am. Lauren looked at her. Really. Looked at her and saw a broken woman who was just as flawed and insecure as anyone else. She saw someone who made terrible choices and had to live with them, and in that moment, she felt the anger begin to fade, replaced by an overwhelming sense of sadness. It was all so pointless, so destructive, and for what? A moment of selfishness? A desire to feel wanted? I don't forgive you, Lauren said quietly, her voice firm. And I don't think I ever will. But I'm done letting you live in my head. You don't get to take any more from me. Carmen's eyes filled with tears. I understand. Lauren stood up, her heart heavy but resolute. I hope you figure yourself out. Because the damage you cause is real, and people have to live with it. She walked out, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. It didn't heal the pain, but it took away some of its power. When she got home, Ethan was waiting. He looked at her, his face filled with hope and fear. Did you get what you needed? Lauren hesitated, the words heavy on her tongue. I got closure, but I didn't get peace. His face fell, his eyes reflecting his sorrow. I wish I could give you that. So do I. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who was trying, who was fighting to be better. Days turned into weeks, and Lauren and Ethan navigated the delicate, treacherous terrain of rebuilding. There were good days, days when they laughed, shared memories, and felt a glimpse of the love they once knew. But there were also bad days, days when Lauren couldn't look at him without seeing the lies, when the betrayal felt fresh, like a wound ripped open. Ethan was patient, never pushing, never demanding forgiveness. He went to therapy, both alone and with her, facing his actions, confronting the parts of himself that had led him to betray her. There were nights he would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the shame of his choices, terrified that she would one day decide she couldn't do it anymore. Lauren's anger became less explosive, more of a simmering hurt that she carried with her. She threw herself into work, finding solace in the routine. She met with Kara more often, confiding in her, leaning on her for strength. But she could never fully escape the questions that haunted her. Could she trust him again? Could she truly forgive? Or was she fooling herself, delaying the inevitable end? One evening, Lauren came home to find Ethan in the garage, sorting through boxes. She hesitated in the doorway, watching him, the familiarity of the scene stirring something in her. They had moved into this house with dreams of a future, of building a life together. That future had been shattered, but the memories were still there, buried under the rubble of broken trust. He looked up, surprised. Hey, I found some old photo albums. She took a step inside, curiosity drawing her closer. Ethan opened a dusty album, revealing pictures of them in their early years, vacations, birthdays, lazy Sundays spent laughing on the couch. Her heart tightened, the images capturing a happiness that felt so distant now. We were happy, she whispered, her voice cracking. Ethan's face fell. We were, and I took that away from us. She swallowed hard, emotions swirling inside her. Why, Ethan? Why wasn't it enough? He looked down, his shoulders slumping. I was selfish, insecure. I needed validation, to feel important. And instead of talking to you, instead of facing my own issues, I looked for an escape. I thought I could have both, the comfort of our life and the thrill of something new. But I was wrong, so wrong. His honesty cut through her, raw and painful. She looked away, blinking back tears. You had everything. I gave you everything. I know, and I destroyed it. His voice broke. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to be better. For you. For us. Even if we don't make it. I want to be someone you can look at without feeling pain. Lauren's chest tightened. I don't know if that's possible. He nodded, his eyes glistening. I'll understand if it's not, but I'm not giving up until you decide. You're done. They stood there in the garage, surrounded by memories of who they used to be, facing the uncertainty of who they could become. Months passed. They went through the motions, but slowly, the walls between them began to come down. They talked more. Honestly, painfully, sometimes yelling, sometimes crying. Ethan answered every question she threw at him, no matter how brutal, no matter how much it hurt. They started doing small things together. Dinners, walks, watching old movies they used to love. It was awkward at first, but familiarity crept back in, piece by piece. One night, as they watched a movie in the living room, Lauren leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder without thinking. She froze, realizing what she'd done. But he stayed still, not daring to move, his breath hitching. For a moment, they stayed like that, her head resting on him, his heart pounding, neither of them daring to speak. The first time they made love. After the affair, it was slow, tentative, filled with tears. It wasn't passionate or spontaneous. It was raw, vulnerable, a mix of love and pain. When it was over, Lauren cried, and Ethan held her, whispering apologies, his own tears mingling with hers. It wasn't the beginning of healing, but it was a step toward it. And then, the other shoe dropped. Lauren came home one evening to find Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, his face pale, his hands shaking. He looked up, guilt and fear in his eyes. "What's wrong?" she asked, her heart dropping. "There's something I didn't tell you," he said, his voice hollow. "Carmen." She reached out. "She's pregnant. She says it's mine." The world tilted, everything spinning as Lauren's worst fear became reality. She gripped the counter, her knees weak, nausea rising. "No. No, no, no." Ethan's face crumpled. "I don't know if she's telling the truth. I don't know anything. But I had to tell you. I can't keep secrets from you anymore." Lauren's vision blurred with tears, betrayal ripping, threw her all over again. She wanted to scream, to throw things, to make him feel the pain he had caused her. But she was too numb, too broken. How could you do this? Lauren drove aimlessly, the rain blurring her vision as tears streamed down her face. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to get away, to escape the suffocating pain that threatened to consume her. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel, her heart pounding erratically as the betrayal replayed in her mind. A child. He might have a child with her. Carmen's name was like poison on her tongue. It wasn't just an affair. It was a potential life, a permanent connection that could never be undone. She pulled into a deserted parking lot, her breath hitching as she broke down, sobs racking her body. She screamed, the sound primal, raw, a release of anguish that she could no longer contain. She had tried. God, she had tried to forgive, to rebuild, to see the man she once loved beneath the ashes of his betrayal. But this was too much. Her phone buzzed. She looked at the screen through blurry eyes, Ethan's name flashing again and again. She threw the phone onto the passenger seat, unable to bear the thought of hearing his voice. What could he possibly say to fix this? To fix the mess he had created? After what felt like hours, the rain began to slow, the world around her quieting. She stared out at the empty lot, the streetlights casting dim reflections on the wet pavement. Her chest ached, her heart shattered beyond recognition. She had no answers, no plan, no idea how to move forward. but she couldn't stay here forever. With numb determination, she started the car and drove to Kara's house. Her best friend answered the door in her pajamas, her face crumpling with worry the moment she saw Lauren's broken expression. "Oh my God, Lauren. What happened?" Lauren fell into her arms, the tears flowing freely again. He might have gotten her pregnant. I can't." Her voice cracked, the words tumbling out in a choked sob. Kara held her tighter, stroking her hair, whispering reassurances. "I'm here. Whatever you need, I'm here." Lauren stayed the night, curled up on Kara's couch, her heart aching as she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her mind was a storm of memories and fears, a chaotic mess that she couldn't untangle. She had thought she could forgive him, thought she could find a way to heal. But this was different. This was permanent. Could she really live with this? Could she live with the possibility of seeing Carmen's child, a constant reminder of his betrayal? The next day, she returned home, exhausted and hollow. Ethan was waiting, his face etched with worry, eyes red from sleeplessness. "Lauren, I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you more than I already have." She looked at him, searching for the man she had loved for so many years, the man who had once been her everything. But all she saw was a stranger. How could you? How could you be so careless, so selfish? He hung his head, shame flooding his face. "I was stupid. I wasn't thinking. I didn't realize. I never imagined this would happen." "That's the problem, Ethan. You never thought about the consequences. Not for 1 second. Her voice wavered, anger fighting with the deep, soul-crushing pain. "You didn't just betray me. You destroyed everything we built. Everything we dreamed of." "I know," he whispered, his shoulders sagging. "I know, and I'll never forgive myself for it." "Good!" she snapped, her anger boiling over. "Because I don't know if I ever will either." His face fell, his eyes filling with tears. "I love you, Lauren. I love you so much. And I'll do anything to make this right. Anything." She looked away, her chest tight. "There's no making this right, Ethan. Not this time." They stood in silence, the weight of his actions pressing down on them. "What are you going to do about her?" she asked, her voice brittle. "About the baby?" He hesitated, guilt flooding his expression. "I'll do a paternity test. I have to know if it's mine, and if it is, I'll take responsibility. But I won't let it come between us. I won't let it ruin us." A bitter laugh escaped her. "It already has. Don't you see that?" He reached out, his hand trembling. "Lauren, please, don't give up on us. Not yet." She pulled away, the touch too much to bear. "I need time. I need space. I can't breathe when I look at you. I can't do this right now." He nodded, his face crumpling. "Take whatever you need. I'll wait. I'll wait forever if that's what it takes." She didn't respond. She walked upstairs, each step heavy, the weight of his betrayal crushing her. She locked the bedroom door behind her and sank to the floor, her back against the wood, tears flowing freely. She had loved him. She still did. But love wasn't enough. Not anymore. She stayed there for hours, lost in her pain, trapped in the memories of what they once were, and for the first time, she wondered if they could ever be that again. Days passed in a blur, each one heavier than the last. Lauren moved through her routine on autopilot, numb and detached, her heart encased in a layer of ice she couldn't break. Ethan tiptoed around her, his presence a constant reminder of the betrayal she couldn't escape. He slept on the couch, his voice tentative whenever he spoke to her, as if afraid that even the sound of his words might shatter her completely. They barely exchanged more than a few words, their home echoing with silence. She couldn't look at him without seeing Carmen's face, without imagining the life he might have created with someone else, a life that had no place for her. One evening, after another day spent avoiding him, she heard him on the phone, his voice low and urgent. "I need to know for sure. I can't live in limbo. Just get the test done and let me know. Please, Carmen, just do this one thing." Lauren's stomach twisted, her body going cold. The paternity test. He was trying to find out if the child was his. She didn't know which answer would be worse. Either way, nothing would ever be the same. She retreated upstairs, her chest tight, her breath coming in short, painful gasps. She needed to get out, to breathe, to escape this prison of pain and doubt. Grabbing her coat, she left without a word, ignoring Ethan's concerned voice calling after her. She drove aimlessly, her thoughts a chaotic swirl of anger, fear, and heartbreak. Eventually, she ended up at her parents' house. Her mother opened the door, her face lighting up in surprise before she noticed Lauren's pale, drawn expression. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" Lauren collapsed into her arms, the dam breaking once more. Everything's falling apart, Mom." They sat on the couch, her mother holding her as she sobbed. When the tears finally slowed, Lauren told her everything: the affair, the lies, the possibility of a child. Her mother's face grew pale, her hands trembling as she gripped Lauren's tightly. "I don't know what to do," Lauren admitted, her voice broken. "I don't know how to live with this, how to forgive him, or if I even want to." Her mother sighed, her eyes sad and weary. "Forgiveness? It's never easy, and sometimes it's not even possible. You need to decide what's right for you, Lauren, not for him, not for anyone else. Just you." "What if I can't forgive him? What if this destroys us?" Her mother looked away, her voice soft. "Then you pick up the pieces and find a way to keep going, no matter how much it hurts." Lauren stayed the night, her mother's words echoing in her mind as she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She couldn't imagine a future without Ethan, but she also couldn't imagine a future with this shadow hanging over them. The next morning, she went home, exhaustion weighing on her. Ethan was in the kitchen, dark circles under his eyes, his face drawn and tired. When he saw her, relief flooded his expression. "I was worried. I didn't know where you went." She looked at him, taking in the man she had once trusted with every piece of her heart. The man who had shattered that trust beyond repair. "I went to my parents. I needed time to think." He nodded, his shoulders sagging. "I understand." They stood in silence, the air heavy with words left unspoken. Finally, she took a deep breath. "Did you get the results?" His face tightened, his eyes filling with fear. "Not yet. I'm supposed to get them today." She looked away, her heart pounding. "I don't know what I want them to say." "Me neither," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I just want this nightmare to end. I just want you back." She turned to leave, her body rigid. "I'm going out. I need space." He didn't try to stop her, his face crumpling as she walked away. Hours later, she sat in the park, watching the sun sink below the horizon. Her phone buzzed, Ethan's name flashing on the screen. Her heart seized, dread flooding her veins. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the screen before she finally answered. His voice was shaky, raw. "I got the results." She closed her eyes, bracing herself. And a long, agonizing pause. "It's not mine. The baby's not mine." Relief crashed over her, a wave so powerful that it left her gasping. But beneath the relief was something else, something sharp and bitter. The baby might not be his, but the betrayal was still real. The affair had still happened. The damage was still done. "I don't know how to feel," she whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I don't know what this means for us. It means I still have hope. It means I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. To fix us. His voice cracked, desperation seeping through. I love you, Lauren. I never stopped loving you. She wiped at her tears, her heart aching. Love isn't enough, Ethan. Not this time. He was silent, his breath hitching. Then tell me what to do. Tell me how to make you stay. She looked out at the darkening sky, the stars beginning to twinkle above. She didn't have an answer. Not yet. Weeks passed, the winter days growing shorter as Lauren navigated the fragile space between hope and despair. She spent her days at work, pouring herself into tasks to drown out the thoughts that haunted her. Evenings were spent at her parents', house or alone, walking aimlessly through the neighborhood, her breath clouding in the frigid air. Ethan tried to give her space, but his presence was unavoidable. He still lived in their house, still occupied the same rooms, still moved through the remnants of their life together. Every now and then, she caught glimpses of the man she used to know, making her coffee just the way she liked it, folding her laundry without a word. But then she would remember Carmen, the lies, the betrayal, and her heart would harden once more. One evening, she found herself standing outside the cafe where Ethan and Carmen used to meet. She stared through the window, her chest tightening as she imagined them sitting together, laughing, sharing secrets she was never meant to hear. She didn't go inside. She couldn't. Instead, she turned and walked to a nearby bar, her emotions swirling like a storm she couldn't contain. She slid onto a stool, ordering a drink she barely tasted. "Rough day?" a voice asked, pulling her from her thoughts. She looked up to find a man standing beside her, his dark hair tousled, a warm, easy smile on his face. He looked familiar, but she couldn't place him. "Yeah." "You could say that," she murmured, turning back to her. "Drink." He hesitated before taking the seat next to her. "I'm sorry if this is weird, but you're Lauren, right? Lauren Matthews?" She frowned, her eyes narrowing. "Do I know you?" He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "No, but I know Ethan. We used to work together at Thompson & Bailey. I'm Ryan." Recognition dawned on her. Ethan had mentioned Ryan before, one of his old co-workers who left the company a few years ago. "Oh, right. Sorry, I didn't recognize you." "It's been a while," he admitted. "I heard you two got married. Congratulations. Though, from the look on your face, I'm guessing things aren't all sunshine and rainbows." She let out a bitter laugh, the sound hollow. "That's putting it mildly." He watched her for a moment, his gaze sympathetic. "I don't want to pry, but if you need someone to talk to, I'm a pretty good listener." Lauren hesitated, her instinct to protect Ethan's secrets warring with her need to unburden herself. She didn't even know this man, but somehow that made it easier. He wasn't part of her world. He wasn't tangled in the web of lies and betrayal that had consumed her life. She looked down at her drink, her fingers tightening around the glass. "He cheated on me." Ryan's expression darkened, his jaw clenching. "I'm sorry. That's awful." She nodded, her throat tightening. "Yeah, it is." He was silent for a moment before he spoke again, his voice low. "I never understood how he could do it." She looked up sharply. "You knew?" He hesitated, his gaze dropping. "Not at first, but I heard rumors. People at the office talk. I confronted him about it once, but he blew me off, said it was none of my business. I should have told you." "I'm sorry." The room tilted, her stomach churning. Ethan's betrayal was worse than she'd thought. Not just the affair, but the lies, the deception, and the people who had known and said nothing. She pushed her drink away, her appetite gone. "I need to go." "Lauren, wait!" But she was already walking out the door, her heart pounding, her mind spinning. She drove home in a haze, her anger boiling over. She stormed through the front door, finding Ethan in the living room, his face lighting up in relief when he saw her. "Lauren, I was starting to get worried. How many people knew? Her voice was cold, sharp as glass. How many people knew about your affair before I did? His face fell, panic flashing in his eyes. What are you talking about? Ryan. I ran into him tonight. He knew. Your co-workers knew. Everyone knew except me. Ethan paled, his shoulders sagging. Lauren. I didn't want you to find out that way. I was trying to protect you. Protect me? She laughed, the sound bitter and broken. You humiliated me, Ethan. You made a fool of me, and you didn't even have the decency to admit it. I had to hear it from someone else. Do you have any idea how that feels? He reached for her, his face crumpling. I never meant to hurt you. She pulled away, her anger flaring. But you did, over and over again. And now, I don't even know who you are anymore. His eyes filled with tears, his voice trembling. I'm still me, Lauren. I'm still the man who loves you, the man who made a terrible mistake, but wants to fix it. Please, don't give up on us. She turned away, her heart breaking. I don't know if there's anything left to save. She walked upstairs, her vision blurred with tears. She locked the bedroom door behind her, collapsing onto the bed as sobs racked her body. The next morning, Lauren woke up with a sense of exhaustion that had nothing to do with sleep. She felt as though the weight of everything had settled on her chest, compressing her lungs, making it hard to breathe, to think clearly. The house felt emptier somehow, even though Ethan was still there. His presence wasn't comforting anymore. It was a reminder of the betrayal. Ethan had been quiet that morning, preparing coffee as usual but without the small talk they'd once shared. Lauren could feel the tension in the air between them, a thick, invisible barrier that neither of them knew how to breach. As she sat down at the kitchen table, trying to focus on her work, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, surprised to see a message from Jake, an old friend of hers. They hadn't talked in months, years, actually. He was one of the few people she'd kept in touch with from her time in college, but their conversations were usually light, distant. She opened the message. Jake. Hey, Lauren. I know it's been a while, but I've been thinking about you. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. Lauren stared at the message for a moment. She hadn't even realized how badly she needed someone to talk to. It wasn't that she didn't have Ethan, or Carmen for that matter, but there was a loneliness in all of this that wasn't just physical. It was deep, a gnawing kind of loneliness that came from feeling utterly betrayed and uncertain about her own next move. She wasn't sure if reaching out to Jake was the right thing to do, but she did it anyway. She typed a quick reply, trying to sound casual. Lauren. Thanks, Jake. I'm not sure where to start, but it's been a rough couple of weeks. It didn't take long for him to respond. Jake. I get it. I don't want to intrude, but if you want to grab coffee or just talk, let me know. Lauren felt a small spark of relief. She'd never been good at asking for help, but something about Jake's message reminded her of the past, when life felt simpler, when there were still pieces of her that weren't weighed down by betrayal. As she considered the invitation, her thoughts flickered back to Ethan. They hadn't talked much since the night of Carmen's apology. He'd been giving her space, respecting her silence, but she could feel the quiet desperation in his attempts to make things right. His presence was there, a constant reminder of everything she was trying to navigate. But he wasn't the only one who needed to speak. Lauren stood up, her mind made up. She grabbed her phone and messaged Jake. Lauren. Let's meet. How about noon? It wasn't a decision to leave Ethan or forgive him. It was just a decision to step outside of her own emotional whirlwind to find some clarity. She didn't expect answers from Jake, but perhaps he could give her a space to think, to talk through the emotions that had been overwhelming her. At noon, Lauren met Jake at a small cafe, the same one they used to visit when they were in school. It felt strangely comforting. almost like stepping into a different version of herself, one that wasn't tangled up in infidelity and heartbreak. She was the same person, but she wasn't the same. Jake greeted her with a warm smile, his casual demeanor putting her slightly at ease. They ordered coffee and sat down at a small corner table by the window. The conversation started easy enough, with Jake filling her in on his life. He talked about his job, a recent trip he'd taken, but it didn't take long for the conversation to turn to her. "How are you, really?" Jake asked, his gaze steady, searching. Lauren hesitated. She didn't want to unload on him, but the weight of it all was too much to keep inside. "I don't know, Jake," she said, her voice soft but thick with emotion. "Everything feels so heavy. I don't know what to do. I don't know if I can forgive him, and I don't know if I should even try. I feel like I'm drowning." Jake leaned forward, his expression full of empathy. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. Whatever you decide, it's going to take time. But you don't have to do it alone." Lauren bit her lip, holding back tears that threatened to spill. She'd been carrying this all on her own for weeks, pushing away anyone who tried to help, but hearing someone say that she didn't have to face it alone, it was a relief she didn't realize she needed. "I feel like I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I've been trying to hold everything together, but it's falling apart." Jake reached across the table, gently touching her hand. His touch was reassuring, but not too much, just enough to remind her that she wasn't invisible, that she wasn't alone. "Maybe that's okay," he said quietly. "Maybe it's okay to fall apart for a while." Lauren nodded, wiping away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. The rawness of it all overwhelmed her. For so long, she'd tried to keep up appearances, to maintain control, to pretend like she had all the answers. The following days passed in a quiet blur for Lauren. Each morning, she awoke with the same heaviness in her chest, the same gnawing uncertainty about what to do next. She had found solace in talking to Jake, but she was aware that the relief was temporary, and the real work, deciding what she wanted, what she needed, was only just beginning. Ethan had kept his distance, giving her the space she'd asked for. He hadn't brought up their situation again, but Lauren could feel the weight of his silent hope, the desperation that lurked beneath his calm exterior. She couldn't ignore it. It was there in the way he moved around the house, in his attempts to make dinner, in his nightly habit of checking on her, even when she was lost in her thoughts. It was clear to her now that Ethan wasn't the same person she'd married. Not anymore. But the question lingered. Could she forgive him? Was there a way back for them, or was the betrayal too deep to recover from? One night, after dinner, she found herself sitting on the edge of their bed, watching him from across the room as he changed into his pajamas. The house was still, quiet except for the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards beneath his feet. Ethan had always been steady, reliable, but now the things that once comforted her felt hollow. When he finished, he walked over to the bed and sat down beside her. He didn't touch her. He never did anymore. He just sat there, waiting. The silence stretched on for a long time before he finally spoke. "Lauren, I know I hurt you. I've been thinking about nothing but that. Every day. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. And I know you may not want to hear it, but I'm still here, hoping that maybe we could start over." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the calmness he'd tried to project. Lauren felt her breath catch in her throat. His apology wasn't new. He'd said it before, countless times. But this time, something about the way he said it, the rawness, in his tone, felt different. She wanted to believe him, but she couldn't simply forget. She couldn't pretend the wound wasn't there, that the trust they'd once built could be easily mended. "Ethan, She trailed off, unsure of how to continue. Her chest tightened as she searched for the right words. "I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't even know if I want to." The words were harsh, but they were the truth. She could see the hurt flash across his face, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he nodded slowly as though he'd expected this, but still held on to the fragile hope that she'd change her mind. "I understand," he said quietly. "I never wanted to hurt you. I don't want to lose you, but I get it. You need time. You need space to figure out what you want." Lauren nodded, her hands twisting in her lap. The decision wasn't simple, and the path ahead felt impossibly tangled. Was there a way for them to rebuild their marriage? Or was this the beginning of the end? "I don't want to hurt you, Ethan," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "But I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending that everything is fine when I'm not sure who you are anymore." She wiped away a tear, hating the weakness she felt. "And I don't even know who I am anymore. I don't know if I can ever trust you the way I did before." He reached out then, his hand resting on hers. It wasn't an aggressive move, it was tentative, as though he feared pushing her away further. But even that small gesture felt foreign to her now. She pulled her hand back, her eyes locking with his. "I don't know what to do," she whispered, feeling the weight of it all. "I wish I did, but I don't." Ethan exhaled, looking down at his hands before speaking again. "I'll give you the time you need, and I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes. But please, don't give up on us. We've been through too much to throw it all away." Lauren felt a lump form in her throat. She didn't know how to respond. The thought of giving up, of ending everything they had, was a terrifying prospect. But so was the thought of trying to rebuild a marriage built on shattered trust. Days turned into weeks, and life continued in a strange limbo. Lauren still hadn't made a decision, and Ethan continued to hope, quietly enduring the agony of waiting for her to find her way back to him. Every conversation they had was careful, polite, but nothing deep or meaningful. They had both retreated into a kind of emotional survival mode, afraid of pushing too hard or revealing too much. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, Lauren went for a walk. The cold air outside felt like a relief, a brief break from the suffocating tension in the house. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to be somewhere else, anywhere but there. She walked aimlessly, her feet carrying her through quiet streets, past darkened houses and empty sidewalks. Her mind raced. She thought about her past, about the woman she was before all of this. The weeks that followed were quiet, but full of tension. Ethan was doing everything he could to prove he was committed to change. He enrolled in therapy, both individual and couples counseling, and began to make small but steady efforts to rebuild the trust that had been broken. Lauren couldn't help but notice the changes in him. He was more present, more attentive, but the scars of his betrayal were still there, hanging between them like a thick fog. Lauren, on the other hand, was struggling to reconcile her feelings. She wanted to believe that people could change, that forgiveness was possible, but every time she looked at Ethan, memories of his infidelity would resurface, of the lies, of the secrets he had kept from her. She had always prided herself on being someone who trusted easily, but now she was learning how fragile trust could be. It felt like walking on eggshells in her own home, constantly second-guessing herself and the decisions she was making. 1. Afternoon, Lauren sat at her kitchen table, papers scattered in front of her, sorting through bills and old receipts, trying to distract herself. She was alone in the house. Ethan had gone out to run some errands. The silence of the house was almost suffocating, and the weight of the unresolved tension was pressing down on her. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Jake. "Jake, how are you holding up?" She stared at the message for a moment, fingers hovering over the screen. She had kept in touch with Jake over the past few weeks, though their conversations had been more supportive than personal. She had never admitted to him or anyone just how much his presence had meant to her during this time. She didn't even know if she could trust herself to speak to him without getting too tangled in her emotions. She typed a quick reply. Lauren, I don't know. Some days are better than others. I'm just tired, you know? A few moments later, Jake responded. Jake, I can imagine. Just take it one day at a time. You deserve peace, Lauren. Whatever that looks like. She felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words, a small comfort in the midst of everything. But then, her mind began to wander. Jake had been there for her during the darkest parts of the past few months, listening, offering support when she needed it. He had been a friend, a confidant, someone who understood the depths of her pain. But was that all it was? Just friendship? Or was there something more she was too afraid to acknowledge? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Ethan had returned. Hey, he said, his voice hesitant as he stepped into the kitchen. His eyes flickered to her phone, and for a split second, a flicker of something crossed his face. It wasn't jealousy or anger, just a quiet discomfort, an unspoken question that hung in the air. Lauren didn't mention the text. It wasn't that she was hiding anything. She just didn't want to add fuel to the fire of the tension that already existed. She had too much to sort through on her own before she could think about anything or anyone else. Hey, she replied softly, trying to force a smile. How was the errand? Fine, he said, his voice still carrying that edge of uncertainty. Listen, I know things are still hard. I know we're not where we want to be yet, but I need you to know that I'm not giving up. I'm here, Lauren. I'm not going anywhere. Her heart twisted. She wanted to believe him, but the walls inside her had become so high that she wasn't sure if she could climb over them. Ethan had hurt her in a way that couldn't be undone. It wasn't just the affair, it was the fact that he had kept it from her for so long, that he had built an entire life of lies. She didn't know if she could live with the weight of that, even if he was sorry. I know you're trying, Lauren said quietly, but I don't know if I can ever trust you again. I don't know if I can be the person I was before. Ethan looked down, his jaw tightening. There was a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes, a rare sight that reminded her of the man she had once loved deeply. But it wasn't enough. I understand, he said, his voice rough. But I'll keep trying. I'll do whatever it takes. The words lingered in the air between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. She wanted to believe him, but part of her didn't know if she could. The therapy sessions continued, each one a small step forward and yet an enormous struggle. The more they talked, the more Lauren realized just how many layers there were to their problems. Trust, communication, unmet needs, everything had been fractured, and the cracks were deep. She found herself questioning whether she still loved Ethan, or if what she was holding on to was the memory of who they had been, not who they were now. One evening, after a particularly difficult session, Lauren found herself back in her car. Parked on the side of the road, her hands clenched tightly on the steering wheel. Over the next few weeks, Lauren's internal conflict intensified. Therapy sessions with Ethan became a strange routine. Sometimes they felt like progress, but other times the emotions felt too raw, too overwhelming to navigate. Every day, she woke up not knowing what kind of woman she'd be that day. The woman who might forgive, or the one who couldn't live with the betrayal anymore. The silence in their house had become familiar, like the steady hum of a broken machine still, running but not quite functioning as it once had. Ethan kept trying. He tried harder than she thought he was capable of. He would leave notes for her, little reminders that he cared, or surprise her with small gestures, picking up her favorite coffee on the way home, making dinner, or simply holding her hand in moments when she least expected it. But none of it could erase the fundamental shift between them. He was trying to rebuild the bridge they'd burned, but Lauren didn't know if the damage was irreversible. She had asked him to give her space, and space he gave her. But even in that space, she felt trapped. Every decision felt like a crossroad that could lead to either her forgiveness or to the end, and Jake was still there, always in the background. Lauren wasn't sure if she was clinging to him out of desperation or if something deeper was stirring, but she couldn't deny how comforting his presence was. There was something genuine in his kindness, something she hadn't seen in Ethan for a long time before the affair. One evening, as Lauren sat on the back porch, staring at the darkening sky, she saw her phone flash on the table in front of her. It was a message from Jake. "Jake, we need to talk. I know you're going through a lot, but I can't keep pretending this isn't affecting me too." Lauren's breath caught in her throat. She had known, somewhere deep inside, that the lines between their friendship had blurred, but to hear it, put so plainly, felt like a jolt to her chest. She typed out a response quickly, her hands trembling. "Lauren, I don't know if I'm ready for this. There's so much mess, and I don't want to make a bigger mess. Can we talk tomorrow?" Jake: "Of course. I'm here when you're ready. Take care of yourself, Lauren." She set the phone down and leaned back, staring at the sky, her mind whirling. The questions gnawed at her. What was she really looking for? Could she find it with Ethan, the man who had betrayed her trust so completely? Or was she reaching for something that felt safer, more familiar in Jake's understanding? It was late by the time Ethan returned. He came through the back door, a little late, but not unusual. When he saw her sitting on the porch, he hesitated before coming over and sitting down next to her. They didn't speak at first, just sat together, the cool night air wrapping around them. Finally, after a long pause, Ethan spoke, his voice low and uncertain. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the other day, about not knowing if you could ever trust me again." Lauren didn't look at him immediately, but she could hear the vulnerability in his tone. "I don't know if I can," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to give up on us," Ethan continued, his words filled with a quiet desperation. "I know I messed up, I know I hurt you, but I'm not the man I was when I did that. I've changed, Lauren. I need you to know that." Her heart ached at his words, but there was a part of her that was exhausted, both from carrying the weight of the past and from trying to imagine a future that might still involve him. "I want to believe you. I do. But it's hard to know what's real anymore, what's true." Ethan's face faltered for a moment before he reached for her hand, his touch tentative but sincere. "I'll keep proving it, day by day if that's what it takes. I'll never stop trying to make things right, Lauren, but I need you to give me a chance." She looked at their intertwined hands, his rough palm against her own. She felt the warmth of his touch, but also the ghosts of their past, the echo of everything that had shattered between them. "I don't know if I can," she said again, her voice hoarse. She pulled her hand away, but only slightly. "I don't know if I can ever go back to how things were. And I don't want to keep holding on to something just because it's familiar. I need to find out if I can ever trust you again. But I need time." Ethan nodded, understanding but clearly devastated. "I'll wait, for however long it takes, but please know this, Lauren. I love you, and I'll be here." The next day, Lauren met Jake for coffee at a small cafe down the street. She had spent the night turning his message over and over in her mind, unsure of how to approach the situation. She had no clear answers, only more questions, and meeting him felt like stepping into unknown territory. When she sat down across from him, Jake was already there, a cup of coffee in front of him. The days following Lauren's conversation with Jake were a blur. She had become a woman trapped in the space between choices, unable to move forward, yet afraid to look back. Every interaction with Ethan felt like a test. He was patient, understanding, and so painfully apologetic. But it was as if the essence of what they once had, the ease, the comfort, the trust, was missing. It had evaporated in a way that couldn't be undone by words, by gestures, or by time. Lauren had started spending more time outside the house, taking long walks, sitting in quiet corners of cafes, trying to clear her mind. But all she could, here in the silence, was the hollow echo of their shattered past. One afternoon, when the air outside was crisp and fresh, Lauren found herself in the same cafe where she had met Jake. She hadn't planned it, but there he was, sitting by the window, a book in front of him, as if he were waiting. She couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward him, the unexpected comfort of his presence. It wasn't love, not yet, but there was something about him that made her feel heard, seen, in a way that Ethan hadn't in months. Jake looked up as she entered, his face breaking into a small, warm smile that immediately put her at ease. "Hi," she said softly, walking over to his table. "Mind if I join you?" "Not at all," Jake replied, moving his book aside to make room for her. "I'm glad you came." Lauren sat down across from him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a shared weight that hovered in the air. Finally, Jake broke the silence. "You've been quiet lately. How are you holding up?" Lauren's gaze wandered out the window. She wasn't sure how to answer that anymore. "I don't know," she said, her voice thin. "Everything feels like it's unraveling, and I don't even know if I'm the one pulling the thread or if it's already falling apart on its own." Jake nodded, his eyes soft, full of empathy. "Sometimes it's not even about pulling the thread," he said gently. "Sometimes it's just about what happens when it comes loose, whether you're ready for it or not." Lauren's lips trembled as she met his gaze. She could see the kindness in his eyes, but there was something more there now, something deeper. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I'm scared of making the wrong choice, of being too hasty or choosing something that makes me feel worse in the end." Jake's voice dropped to a quiet murmur. "You're not alone in that fear." No one wants to make the wrong choice, especially when it feels like it could change everything. But sometimes you have to take the leap, even if you don't know where you'll land. Lauren felt the weight of his words, the simplicity of them, but also the truth buried underneath. She had been holding on to Ethan, holding on to their history, because it was safe, even if it hurt. But what if safety wasn't enough anymore? What if, to move forward, she had to let go of the past completely, even if it meant creating a new life for herself, one she never imagined? As the conversation turned lighter, Lauren could feel the walls she had put up around herself slowly, starting to crumble. Jake wasn't pressuring her. He wasn't asking for anything more than her honesty, her presence in the moment. And for the first time in weeks, Lauren realized she hadn't felt that kind of peace in a long time. But then, as if summoned by her thoughts, her phone buzzed on the table. Her heart stopped when she saw Ethan's name. She took a deep breath, excusing herself, and stepped outside to take the call. The world felt distant as she pressed the phone to her ear. "Lauren," Ethan's voice came through, shaky. "Can we talk? I know you're not sure where we stand right now, but I need you to know that I'm trying. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." Her chest tightened as she heard the desperation in his voice. She glanced back inside the cafe at Jake, who was sitting alone at the table looking out the window with a calm, patient expression. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," Lauren said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can keep holding on to something that feels like it's already broken. I don't want to lose you, Lauren. I know I've messed up, and I've hurt you more than I ever thought I could, but I can't undo what's been done. I can only promise that I'll keep trying." Her heart felt heavy, torn in two. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that the man she loved was still somewhere underneath the mistakes and the betrayal. but there was a part of her that didn't know if she could keep living in the shadow of what he had done. "I need more time," she said softly, her throat tight. "I can't promise anything, Ethan. I don't know what's going to happen, but I can't make a decision right now." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, resigned. "I'll wait, but I need you to know, Lauren, I love you." The weeks following Lauren's meeting with Jake felt like a slow, painful march toward something inevitable. She wasn't sure what it was yet, whether it was an end or a beginning, but every day it became harder to ignore the cracks in her marriage with Ethan. The guilt weighed on her. She still loved him, but the betrayal lingered like an uninvited shadow. How could she ever trust him again? And even more, how could she trust herself to make the right choice? Ethan had become quieter, more withdrawn in the weeks since their conversation. He seemed to be doing everything he could to make up for his mistakes, but Lauren wasn't sure if it was enough. There were moments where she would catch him looking at her with a deep, silent yearning. But it was always followed by a look of regret, as though he were waiting for her to say something, anything, to absolve him of his sins. But Lauren couldn't forgive him. Not yet. And maybe not ever. She spent a lot of time alone, walking through their neighborhood, reflecting. She knew that if she stayed in this state of constant indecision, she would lose herself. But every time she thought about moving forward, about truly cutting ties with Ethan, a knot would tighten in her chest. She was scared of what that meant, scared of being alone, scared of the repercussions of her choices, scared of how they would affect her future. One evening, she sat on the balcony, staring at the horizon as the sun dipped beneath the trees. Her phone buzzed and she saw Jake's name flash across the screen. "Can we talk?" She felt a pang of nervousness in her stomach. She hadn't seen Jake in days, not since that afternoon in the cafe. She hadn't allowed herself to entertain the thought of him beyond that moment. He had been kind, understanding, but their connection had always been marked by the uncertainty of her unresolved feelings for Ethan. But maybe it was time to stop pretending that everything would sort itself out. She typed back, her fingers trembling slightly. "Yes. When? I'll be at the park in an hour." The message was short and direct, as if he were waiting for her to make the first move, waiting to see if she would choose him, or at least take the first step toward finding out if they could be something more. Lauren didn't hesitate. She grabbed her coat and headed out the door. Jake was already sitting on a bench when she arrived. His posture was relaxed, but there was a tension in his jaw that betrayed his calm demeanor. He looked up when she approached, his face softening with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Hi," he said, standing up. "Thanks for coming." "Of course," Lauren replied, sitting beside him on the bench. The park was quiet, the only sound the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. She felt the weight of the silence between them, neither of them rushing to fill it. After a long moment, Jake spoke again. "I don't want to push you, Lauren. I know you're dealing with a lot right now. I don't want you to feel like you have to carry it all by yourself." She glanced at him, the sincerity in his eyes catching her off guard. "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel anymore. I thought I had everything figured out. Ethan and we've been through a lot, but this is different. I don't know how to move forward from here." Jake nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand. But I also see the way you look at him, Lauren. I see the weight you're carrying. You can't heal if you're stuck in the past. You deserve more than to just wait for something to happen." His words were like a challenge, a reflection of the thoughts she'd been avoiding for so long. She wanted to believe him, but there was a part of her that was still holding on to the history she had with Ethan. The memories, the love, the shared dreams. Could she really let it all go? "What if I'm not ready to let go?" Lauren said, her voice low. "What if there's still a chance for us?" What if Ethan can change? Jake's gaze softened, and he leaned in slightly. I'm not asking you to choose me, Lauren. I'm asking you to choose yourself. Whatever that means, whether it's with him, with me, or by yourself. But you can't keep living in this limbo. Lauren swallowed, her heart pounding in her chest. I don't know if I can forgive him. I don't know if I can ever go back to what we had. Jake was quiet for a moment, then he spoke again, this time more gently. Sometimes forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of what they did. You don't have to make any decisions now, but you can start by letting go of the anger, the resentment. It's not easy, but it's the only way forward. Lauren turned her gaze to the ground, letting his words sink in. The idea of forgiveness, of truly letting go, terrified her. It meant confronting her own pain, her own brokenness, and it meant accepting that she wasn't the same person she had been before. But maybe that was the point. Maybe she had to change too. The next few days passed in a haze of quiet tension. Ethan respected Lauren's need for space, retreating into himself as he always did when confronted with something he didn't understand. He went to work, came home, and said little, as if waiting for a sign from Lauren, waiting for her to make the decision he couldn't bring himself to ask her for. But every time Lauren caught his eyes, there was a chasm between them, deeper than the betrayals, deeper than the secrets. She didn't know if it could ever be bridged. The uncertainty gnawed at her, but it was also strangely liberating. She realized that, for the first time in years, she had nothing to lose. She didn't need to be trapped by the idea of what was or what should have been. She could finally embrace the raw, uncomfortable truth that her future, whatever it looked like, was hers alone to choose. On the fourth day, as Lauren sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and staring out the window, she found herself reaching for her phone. Her thumb hovered over Jake's contact. He had sent a couple of brief messages since their meeting at the park, checking in. How are you? I'm here if you need anything. Lauren's heart twisted. He was still there, still offering, a kind of solace she didn't feel with Ethan anymore. She wanted to believe that there could be something between them, that they could somehow escape the wreckage of her past and start something new. But her heart was tangled, and she knew there were decisions she couldn't avoid. She tapped the screen, her message typed out before she had a chance to second-guess herself. I've been thinking a lot. Can we meet again? The reply came within moments. Of course. When? Tonight? Lauren typed, the word feeling like an invitation to something larger than she was ready for. I'll be there. That evening, the air was thick with anticipation. As Lauren waited for Jake at the small cafe they'd chosen as their meeting place, she felt a sense of dread creeping in. She hadn't told Ethan where she was going. She knew it would spark a confrontation, and she wasn't ready for that yet. But she needed this. She needed to explore the possibility of something else, of moving forward, even if it meant stepping away from everything she had built with Ethan. Jake arrived a few minutes late, his eyes scanning the room before landing on her. When he smiled, it wasn't the usual warm grin. It was more cautious, as if he too was uncertain of where this meeting would lead. Hey, he said softly, sliding into the chair across from her. You good? Lauren nodded. I think so, or at least I'm starting to be. There was a quiet moment before either of them spoke again. How are you holding up? Jake asked, his voice gentle, as if he were afraid to push her too far. Lauren took a deep breath. I'm trying to make sense of it all. I've been living in a fog, you know? Like everything I thought I understood about love and marriage is, well, it's all been upended. And I feel lost. I get that, Jake said, his voice full of understanding. You don't have to have it all figured out right now, Lauren. You've been through a lot. But I want you to know, whatever you decide, you won't be alone. Her heart clenched. She didn't want to admit it, but the truth was, she felt more alive sitting across from Jake than she had in months. There was something about him, something gentle and steady, that made her believe she could find a way out of the mess she was in. "Jake," she started, her voice wavering. "I don't know what I'm doing. I keep thinking about Ethan, about the life we built, but it feels broken. And I don't know if I can forgive him. And I don't know if I can move on either, not without feeling like I'm betraying everything that I've held on to." He reached across the table, his hand hovering just above hers, an unspoken invitation. "You're not betraying anything, Lauren. You're just being honest with yourself. And that's the most important thing. If you need time, or if you need to walk away from everything, I'll respect that. But I think you deserve to know that you can move forward however that looks. And if that means me, then I'll be here. But if not, I'll understand that too." Lauren's breath caught in her chest. She wasn't sure what she expected from this meeting, but she hadn't anticipated the raw honesty of Jake's words. He wasn't trying to pressure her, wasn't trying to persuade her. He was just present, and that alone was enough to make her feel understood. She pulled her hand away, nervously twisting her napkin in her lap. "I don't know if I'm ready to make any decisions yet. Ethan's been trying, and part of me wants to believe he can change. But another part of me feels like I'm clinging to something that's already gone." Jake nodded, his expression softening. "You don't have to decide now, but promise me you'll take care of yourself, Lauren. I know you've been hurt, and I know it's hard, but you're worth more than the pain you're carrying." The following weeks were a quiet storm, filled with small decisions that added weight to the uncertainty of it all. Lauren's life felt fractured, as if she were standing at the edge of something, not knowing whether to jump or turn away. There was no clear path forward, no clean slate, but with every passing day, the space between her and Ethan seemed to stretch wider, filled with both the desire to heal and the undeniable ache of betrayal. Ethan, for his part, had shifted. He was trying in the way that someone does when they realize the gravity of their mistakes. The therapy sessions he'd started attending had become a routine, and the days he spent working on himself were evident. But it was too little, too late. Lauren saw the change, but the resentment still simmered beneath her skin, a constant reminder that the person she had loved was capable of causing her the deepest kind of pain. She couldn't shake the image of Ethan with Sarah, of the lies they had told, the secrets they'd kept, and how, in that moment, the person she had trusted the most had betrayed her in ways that still made her stomach churn. Those memories were alive in her mind, sharp and biting. They would be, for a long time. But there were moments of tenderness, too. Ethan would leave her a note in the kitchen when he went out, telling her he hoped she had a good day. He would bring home her favorite coffee or take over the kids' bedtime routine without her asking. It was small, almost painfully so, as if he was reminding her of everything they had been, everything that could still be. Still, the trust was gone. And trust, once broken, was never the same. Lauren had spent weeks cycling through emotions, trying to figure out where she stood. She knew she wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. But she also knew she couldn't live in limbo forever. And yet, as the days stretched into months, the tension between them began to feel suffocating. Every glance, every word felt charged. There was too much unspoken, too much unresolved. Then one evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Lauren found herself sitting across from Ethan at the kitchen table, the dim light of the lamp casting shadows on his face. He was quiet, waiting for her to say something. Anything. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan looked at her, and for the first time in a long while, she saw vulnerability in his eyes. "I don't know," he said, his voice low. "I was selfish. I wanted to protect you. but I ended up destroying everything. The simplicity of his answer stung. It was so painfully honest, and yet it wasn't enough. It could never be enough. Lauren looked away, trying to steady her breath. You think I don't know that? You think I don't see that? But it's not about your guilt, Ethan. It's about what you did to me, to us. It's about what we'll never get back. The silence that followed was thick. Ethan reached out, but she pulled back instinctively. She wasn't ready for that. She wasn't ready to let him in again. Not yet. I don't know how to fix this, he said quietly. But I want to try. I want to make it right, Lauren, if you'll let me. Her heart wavered at the sincerity in his words. But the wound was still too raw. She knew he wanted to rebuild, to fix what had been broken. But she didn't know if she could give him that power again. Could she trust him? Could she trust herself to make the right choice? I need time, she whispered almost to herself. I need space to figure out if this is something I can forgive, something I can live with. Ethan nodded, his eyes clouded with a mixture of guilt and hope. I'll give you all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. But even as he spoke those words, Lauren knew that they weren't the solution. Time wasn't a guarantee. Time didn't heal all wounds, especially the ones that cut deep. Time would only make the truth clearer, more painful. As the days passed, Lauren's resolve began to harden. She didn't know if she could ever trust Ethan again, but she couldn't. Keep living in the uncertainty of this limbo. She felt the weight of the decision she had to make pressing down on her, growing heavier with every passing day. One afternoon, as she was sitting in the park, watching the kids run around, Jake called. His voice was steady, comforting, but there was an edge of concern in it. I've been thinking about you, he said, about everything you're going through, and I just wanted you to know that I'm here, for whatever you need. Lauren felt a pang of guilt. She had been avoiding him in recent weeks, unsure of what her feelings for him really were. But hearing his voice now, she felt the familiar warmth wash over her. Jake had never asked for anything, never pushed her to make a decision. He had always been there just when she needed him most. Thank you, she said quietly. I don't know what I'm doing right now. I feel like I'm walking through a fog. The days after Lauren sent the text to Ethan were filled with an unsettling calm. She went through the motions of daily life, preparing meals, taking the kids to school, working, but every part of her mind was consumed with what the conversation would bring. She hadn't felt this uncertain about her future in years. Ethan had read the message but hadn't responded yet, which only intensified the growing tension. It wasn't until 2 days later, after dinner, that he walked into the living room and sat beside her. The faint echo of their old intimacy was there, the space between them once familiar, now heavy with things unsaid. I got your message, Ethan started, his voice low. I think we need to talk too. Lauren nodded, the knot in her stomach tightening. She couldn't read him, couldn't tell if he was hopeful, anxious, or resigned. She looked at him for a moment, searching his face for signs of what he was really feeling, but his expression was unreadable. Where do we even begin? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. She was surprised by how much it hurt to even ask the question, to admit that their entire world had shifted, that everything they had built felt like it was crumbling before her eyes. Ethan swallowed, running a hand through his hair. I know I've betrayed you, he said quietly, and I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I just want you to know that I am willing to do whatever it takes. Stop, Lauren interrupted, her voice sharp. I don't need you to promise me that you'll fix everything. I need to understand why. Why did you do it? What was going through your mind when you decided to hurt me like that? Her words hung in the air, and Ethan flinched as if struck. It had been a question she'd been carrying for months, a question that had haunted every corner of her mind. Why had he done it? They had a life together, a history, and yet he had thrown it all away for something that she didn't even fully understand. "I don't have a good excuse," he said, his eyes avoiding hers. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. And I didn't think about the consequences, not really. It's hard to explain, but it's like I wasn't thinking about you or the kids or what this would do to our life. I was selfish, Lauren, and I didn't see what was right in front of me until I ruined everything." Lauren felt the weight of his words, but they didn't make the pain go away. In fact, they only seemed to amplify it. She wanted to believe him, wanted to reach for the hope that he could change, that they could find a way back to what they had been. But the reality of his betrayal kept pulling her back into the hurt, into the doubts. "I don't know how to move forward from this, Ethan," she said softly, her voice breaking. "I don't know if I can trust you again. You've shattered something inside of me, and it's not going to be fixed with words." There was a long pause, and for a moment it felt like neither of them could breathe. Ethan reached out, his hand hovering near hers, but she pulled back, the space between them now more profound than it had ever been. "I understand," he said after a long moment, his voice thick with emotion. "And I don't expect you to trust me overnight. I know it's going to take time. But I want to try. I love you, Lauren. I'm not giving up on us." The sincerity in his voice pierced through her defenses, but it wasn't enough to erase the betrayal. Love was supposed to be a foundation, not something you could throw away on a whim, and yet he had done exactly that. No amount of promises, no matter how heartfelt, could change the fact that he had chosen someone else over her. "I need to think," Lauren replied, standing up from the couch. She couldn't sit in that silence anymore, couldn't let the weight of his words keep her in that moment. "I don't know what I want, but I know that I can't make any decisions like this. Not when I'm still feeling everything." Ethan nodded, looking pained but understanding. He didn't try to stop her as she walked toward the kitchen, where the quiet hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. Days passed, and Lauren found herself unable to escape the constant swirl of emotions. She still loved Ethan, but how could she love someone who had hurt her so deeply? Could she ever truly forgive him, or was forgiveness just another form of denial? She began seeing a therapist, hoping that it would help her untangle the mess of her emotions. It was there, during one of those sessions, that she realized something. She had spent so much of her life trying to please others, trying to be the person everyone expected her to be, that she had lost sight of her own needs. She had buried her own wants and desires beneath the weight of obligation, of duty. And now, in the face of Ethan's betrayal, she was confronted with the reality that she had to choose herself. She couldn't decide if that meant leaving him or finding a way to move forward together. The weeks that followed were filled with an uncomfortable kind of limbo. Lauren and Ethan navigated the delicate balance of coexisting, each too aware of the unspoken things between them. The silence was suffocating, but neither of them had the courage to fill it with anything that might alter the fragile equilibrium they'd established. Lauren had her therapy sessions, where she spoke honestly about the confusion swirling inside her, about the love she still felt for Ethan, and the deep, gnawing distrust that had taken root. But outside of those moments, she stayed quiet. She withdrew, focusing on her work and their children. She couldn't bring herself to make a decision, couldn't force herself to be the one to decide their fate. Ethan, for his part, did everything he could to show he was willing to try. He did the dishes, helped with the kids' homework, made her coffee in the morning without being asked. It was like he was trying to redeem himself in the quietest ways possible. But it wasn't enough. The betrayal had changed them both in ways that could never be undone. She could see the difference in the way he looked at her, like he was constantly waiting for the moment she would leave, or worse, forgive him. The emotional distance between them seemed to grow each day, despite their attempts to keep things normal for the kids. The nights were the hardest. Without the intimacy they once shared, sleep felt like a strange, isolated place. Lauren often lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if things would ever be right again. One evening, as they were preparing dinner, their daughter, Sophie, broke the silence with a simple question that hung in the air, unanswered. "Mom, why are you and Dad not laughing anymore?" she asked, her small voice filled with an innocence that cut through the tension. "You used to laugh all the time?" Lauren froze, her hand hovering over the chopping board. She exchanged a glance with Ethan, but he quickly looked away as if the question was too raw to acknowledge. She swallowed, feeling the weight of the truth in that simple question. How long had it been since they had genuinely laughed together? How long had it been since they'd just enjoyed each other's company? "I don't know, sweetie," Lauren said, forcing a smile, trying to make it sound casual. "We're just going through a tough time right now." Sophie didn't seem satisfied with that answer, but she didn't press further. She just nodded and went back to coloring at the kitchen table, leaving Lauren with the bitter taste of unfinished business on her tongue. Later that night, after they had tucked the kids into bed, Ethan found her sitting in the living room, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows on her face. He hesitated before sitting next to her, the air thick with the things they couldn't say. "I know we're not okay," he said quietly, "but I still want us to be." Lauren looked at him, the man she had once trusted with her whole heart, now reduced to a stranger sitting beside her. She wanted to tell him that she still loved him, that she wasn't ready to let go of their family, but the words didn't come. Instead, she felt a wave of exhaustion, like the weight of the last few months had been a burden she couldn't carry anymore. "I don't know if I can be what you want me to be anymore, Ethan," she said softly. "I don't know if I even know who I am anymore." The words seemed to hang in the air, heavier than anything she had said before. She wasn't just talking about their marriage. She was talking about herself, about how lost she had become in the wake of his betrayal. Ethan nodded, his eyes filled with both sadness and understanding. "I don't expect you to be the same person, but I'm here, Lauren, and I'm willing to wait, as long as it takes. If you want me to go, I'll go. But if you want me to stay, I'll be here. I'll be the person you need me to be. But only if you're ready. I'm not rushing you." Lauren's heart ached at his words. How could she make him understand that? It wasn't just about waiting. It wasn't about him being the person she needed. It was about whether or not she could ever trust him again. It was about whether or not she could rebuild something that had been so broken. She shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I don't know, Ethan. I need time. I need space to figure out if I can ever forgive you. If we can ever be us again." He didn't respond immediately, just watched her with a heavy expression. And then, slowly, he reached over and touched her hand, his touch gentle, almost tentative. "I'm not going anywhere," he said softly. "I'll be here. Even if it takes years, I'll be waiting." The sincerity in his voice struck a chord, deep inside her, but the words felt like a promise she wasn't sure she could accept. She pulled her hand away, not because she didn't feel the pull, but because she was terrified of what it might mean. Could she forgive him? Could she rebuild their marriage?